The letter had no greeting. It said, "Come to Wintersea Hall at noon on the 14th. Come alone. Burn this after." Ilara Voss read it twice, then used it to dry a wet jar of tincture she had no money left to replace. She left the burn order unfulfilled. She left a lot of orders unfulfilled these days. The carriage the Duke sent arrived exactly on time, which told her everything she needed to know about the man before she ever met him. People who sent carriages that arrived exactly on time were people who expected the world to be controlled and were quietly furious when it was not. She had lived with a man like that. She had buried him 6 months ago and inherited his debts along with his leather medical bag and exactly one good dress, which she was now wearing. Wintersea Hall sat at the edge of land that had clearly decided it did not want to be hospitable. The moors went on in all directions, gray-green and sullen, and the hall itself rose out of them like something that had been dared into existence. Stone. Old stone. The kind that absorbed cold and kept it like a personal collection. She had expected servants at the door. There was one. He was very old and moved like a man who had made peace with the fact that speed was no longer available to him. He took her coat without a word and led her through hallways where the fireplaces were cold, and a grandfather clock stood silent at the end of a corridor, its hands at a time that had not been correct in what looked like years. The Duke of Wintersea was standing when she entered the library. She noticed that immediately. He was standing, which had cost him something. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way his left hand rested against the desk behind him at an angle that looked casual, but was load-bearing. He was tall. He had the kind of face that had been designed for certainty, and was now being worn down by something that did not respond to certainty. Dark eyes, a mouth that had forgotten how to be at rest. He was maybe 35. He looked older in the places where illness had been at work. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. She was the only other person in the room. He said, "I have 6 months, possibly less. My physicians are optimistic, which means I trust them less, not more." She said nothing. Her father had taught her that silence in the first 10 seconds was worth 3 minutes of questions. "I need an heir," he said. "I need a wife to bear one. In exchange for this, you will receive the title of Duchess of Wintersea upon our marriage, full possession of the Wintersea estate and its corresponding income upon my death, a monthly allowance beginning immediately, and the full clearing of your father's outstanding debts, which I understand total rather more than his estate was worth." Ilara did not move. She had practiced not moving when things knocked against the inside of her chest. She was very good at it. "You have done your research," she said. "I have done everything I do," he said, thoroughly. She looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at a patient, not for what they said, for what the body was doing while they said it. His breathing was controlled but shallow. He had weight to lose that he had already lost. His color was wrong in the way that color went wrong when something was working against the blood. "Who diagnosed you?" she said. He blinked. It was very small. "Dr. Hargrove, in London." "And his second opinion?" "I did not seek one." "Then you have a first opinion," she said, "which is a starting point, not a verdict." He looked at her for a moment. "You are not asking about the arrangement." "I will ask about the arrangement when I know what I am actually agreeing to," she said. "What is the primary symptom, the one that woke you up to this?" He was silent. "I am a physician's daughter," she said. "I have been in sick rooms since I was 9. You can tell me, or you can stand there being authoritative about your own death, but one of those is more useful than the other." The silence stretched. Then he said, "Fatigue. Pain in the left side, below the ribs. Weight loss I did not choose." She nodded. She filed these away behind her eyes where she filed everything that needed thinking about later. "When did the symptoms begin?" 8 months ago. "And Hargrove's prognosis was 6 months from when?" 2 months ago. She did the arithmetic. She let him see her doing it. "You have used 2 of your 6 months finding me," she said. He said, "Yes." She walked to the window. The moors went on beyond the glass, gray and unimpressed. She looked at them for a moment, then she turned back. "I will marry you," she said, "but I want something that is not in your arrangement." He waited. "I want access to your medical records, everything Hargrove gave you. I want to speak with him directly, and I want you to do what I tell you to do, medically, without argument, for as long as we are married." He said, "You are not a physician." "No," she agreed. "My father was. He taught me everything he knew for 22 years, which is more than most physicians know by 30. You can refuse. You can find another woman willing to accept your 6 months. Or you can accept that if you came this far, you might as well let someone who is not resigned to your death have a look at you." The clock in the hall was still silent. The fire was unlit. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. He said, "Is that your answer to my proposal?" She said, "That is the beginning of my answer." He looked at her. She looked at him. Something moved across his face that she had not expected to see on a man who had opened this conversation with the emotional temperature of a legal document. She could not name it exactly. It was too quick. Then he laughed. It came out of him like something that had been stored somewhere and forgotten, opened by accident. It lasted 4 seconds, maybe 5, and then he pressed his mouth together, and it was gone, but the shape of it stayed in the room. She had not expected that. She did not let him see that she had not expected it. "Your full answer?" he said. His voice was back to the temperature it had started at. Almost. "My full answer," she said, "is yes, but I am going to make sure you live long enough to regret asking me." He said nothing. But he had stopped holding himself against the desk quite so hard. She looked around the library. Dark shelves, cold hearth, the dust of a house that had been endured rather than lived in. She looked back at him. "Also," she said, "your fireplaces are all cold. That is going to change." She left him standing in his library with an unlit fire and a still echoing laugh and no immediate answer to either. The carriage took her back to the village. She sat with her hands folded and her face arranged and did not think about the laugh for the entire 30-minute ride. She was very disciplined about not thinking about it. She almost managed it. The first morning she woke at Wintersea, she found the medicine cabinet in the east corridor and reorganized it before breakfast. It was not what she had planned to do first. She had planned to eat something, learn the layout of the house, perhaps speak with the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldrich, who had a face like a woman who had seen everything, and filed none of it away, in case it proved useful to someone else. But she had passed the cabinet in the corridor, the door slightly ajar, and she had looked inside, and what she had seen in there was a medical catastrophe presented as household supplies. Laudanum in 3 different strengths with no labels indicating which was which. A plaster tin that had been opened and not properly resealed. 2 different bottles of tincture of iodine, one nearly empty, one full, neither dated. A set of linen bandages rolled incorrectly in a way that would mean they unrolled wrong under pressure when it mattered. And at the back, pushed behind everything else, a small brown bottle with a label in her father's handwriting. She held that one for a moment, put it back, straightened it, got to work. She spent 45 minutes reorganizing, dating, labeling, and culling. She threw away 3 things that should have been thrown away, in what she estimated was 1891, based on the consistency of the wax seal. She moved the laudanum to a locked case she found on the bottom shelf, because laudanum in 3 unlabeled strengths loose in a corridor was the kind of thing that turned accidents into tragedies. When she finished, she turned around and found Adrian Hale standing in the doorway. He was watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not displeasure. Something more like a man who has come to the door expecting one thing and found another, and has not yet decided whether the other thing is better or worse. "Good morning," she said. "You reorganized the medical supplies," he said. "They needed it. The laudanum was unlabeled. Do you know what happens if someone takes the strong preparation, thinking it is the mild one?" "I am aware of what laudanum does," he said. "Then you understand why I moved it." She closed the cabinet. "Also, the iodine was not dated. Old iodine loses efficacy. How long has your household been using these supplies?" He said, "I did not monitor the household medical supplies personally." "I noticed," she said. He looked at her, then at the cabinet. "Mrs. Aldrich has managed this house for 11 years, he said. "And she is excellent at it," Ilara said. "I have no doubt. But Mrs. Aldrich is a housekeeper. She is not responsible for knowing that incorrectly rolled bandages fail under pressure. That is a different kind of knowledge." A pause. "She will mention that you were in the corridor at 6 in the morning reorganizing things," he said. "Let her," Ilara said. "I was. It needed doing." Something moved in his face again. That same impossible to categorize thing. He looked at the cabinet, then back at her. Then he said, without inflection, "Breakfast is at 7. "I know," she said. "I asked Mrs. Aldrich yesterday." He left. She listened to his footsteps go down the corridor, steady but not quite even, and she made a small note in the back of her mind about which side carried the uneven weight. Dinner that night was the longest 7 minutes of silence she had experienced outside of a funeral. They sat at opposite ends of a table designed for 8 people, which was the kind of table that made 2 people feel like a misunderstanding. The food was good. The candles were adequate. The silence was tremendous. She counted 7 minutes by the rhythm of her own breathing, the way her father had taught her to count during difficult procedures. 1 breath, 2 breath, 3 breath, stay. Then he said, Willow bark. She looked up. What about it? You added it to the supplies this morning. I found it on the second shelf. You checked the cabinet, she said. I wanted to see what you had done. She set down her fork. Willow bark is useful for fever and pain. It works. The fact that it is not fashionable with London physicians does not change the fact that it works. I did not say it did not work, he said. I said I noticed it. Hargrove gave you laudanum, she said. Did it help? He said nothing. Laudanum quiets the complaint, she said. It does not address the cause. It is the medical equivalent of turning the clock to face the wall so you cannot see what time it is. The time does not change. He looked at her. That is a very dramatic analogy. I have a dramatic subject, she said. Another silence. Different from the first one. The first silence had been two strangers refusing to speak to each other. This one had something else in it. Something that was not quite argument and not quite conversation, but was at least moving in the direction of one. I find laudanum effective, he said. I am sure you do, she said. That is the point of laudanum. She picked her fork back up. Try the willow bark. 2 days. If you think it is less useful, we will discuss it. He looked down the length of the table at her. You are very confident for someone who is not a physician. My father was a physician for 30 years, she said. I watched every patient he treated. I asked him questions about every one. I assisted in procedures from the age of 12. I am not confident because I think I know more than I do. I am confident because I know exactly what I know and I know it well. He said. That is either admirable or terrifying. Both, she said. Is there more bread? He looked startled. Then he gestured to the footman. The bread came. They finished dinner with 3 more exchanges about willow bark, one about the temperature of the east wing, and one about whether the particular grey of the moors was depressing or merely realistic, which ended inconclusively but did not end badly. She found, walking back to her rooms that night, that she was not dreading tomorrow's dinner. She noted that, filed it, did not examine it further. What she was examining instead, as she sat at the small desk in her room and opened the leather journal she had brought from her father's house, was his blood work summary, which Hargrove had sent by post that afternoon. She had written to him the day after the proposal. She had not told Adrian she had done it. She read the blood work. Then she read it again. Hargrove was not wrong. There was something wrong. But Hargrove had done what Hargrove's type always did, looked at the worst reading and decided it was the verdict. He had not looked for what might be driving the worst reading. He had looked at the outcome and called it the cause. She turned to a clean page in the journal and started writing. A week later, she began finding books on her desk. The first was a botanical text on plant-derived medicines, ancient but well-maintained, with annotations in pencil along the margins that were so small they required good light to read. The annotations were his. She could tell because they were precise and occasionally impatient, and once, on a page about the use of foxglove preparations, said simply, Hargrove does not know this. She wrote in the margin below, he does now. She left the book on his desk. The next morning there was a different book on her desk, a more recent one, London published, on the composition of blood and what its failures could indicate. Inside the front cover, in that same small writing, this may be relevant to your notes. I read the summary you left in the parlor. I was not meant to see it. I read it anyway. She put her response on the page he had cited. Relevant is one word for it. I have questions about chapters 3 and 7. They contradict each other and I think chapter 3 is wrong. This went on for 11 days before either of them mentioned it aloud. By then there were 6 books cycling between their 2 desks, 3 letters from Hargrove she had prompted, and one from a physician in Edinburgh who her father had respected and she had written to in her father's name, without entirely meaning to deceive anyone, but not entirely not meaning to either. The night she found herself sitting on the floor in the corridor outside his bedroom at 4 in the morning, she had not planned it. He had a bad night. She had heard it begin through the wall between their wings, that particular quality of sleeplessness that had a physical source. The sound of a person trying to stay still because moving made it worse. She had learned that sound from her father's patients. You did not forget it once you knew it. She could not go in. The arrangement was clear on the matter of private spaces and she had agreed to it, and she was not going to be the one to cross lines she had drawn herself. But she also could not go back to her room and put the pillow over her ears, which was what a reasonable person would have done. So she sat down on the floor of the corridor, her back against the wall opposite his door, and she stayed. She had her journal. She wrote notes by the low light of the corridor lamp for an hour. Then she put the journal down and sat with her hands in her lap and did not sleep but was not quite awake. At some point the sounds on the other side of the door changed. The specific quality of wakefulness shifted, and then his voice came, quiet, through the door. I know you are there, he said. She said, go to sleep. A pause. You could come in. I agreed to respect your space, she said. I am respecting it. From the corridor. It still counts. Another pause. Longer. Then, you are the most peculiar woman I have ever met. My father said that to me every week, she said. I took it as a compliment. She heard what might have been a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite not one. In the morning he did not mention the corridor, she did not mention it, but he left a cup of tea on the hall table outside her door at 6 in the morning, and it was exactly the right temperature, which meant he had timed it, which meant he had thought about it, which was more than she chose to examine at 6 in the morning. She drank the tea, she got on with her notes. She did not think about what it meant that he had known exactly how long the tea needed to wait before she opened the door. She was becoming, she noted, slightly frightened of how much she was not letting herself think about. At the society dinner in the third week of November, a woman named Catherine Aldgate asked Ilara, in the particular tone that society women used when they wished to be brutal while appearing to be curious, what it was like to be married to a man who was expected to die. The table had 9 other people at it. The candelabra was expensive, the soup was cream-based and entirely adequate. Ilara set down her spoon. She said, "He reads faster than anyone I have ever met. He is wrong about botanical medicine and right about everything political, which is an irritating combination. He leaves tea outside my door at exactly the right temperature, which requires a degree of mathematical precision I did not expect from a duke. He argued with me for 3 days about a chapter in a pharmacology text and lost, which he has not explicitly admitted but which is evident from the fact that he has not mentioned chapter 3 again." The table was quiet. "If you are asking whether I think about the fact that his physicians have given him a limited time," she said, "then yes, I think about it the way I think about anything that requires solving. What it is like is this. It is like having a clock on the mantle that may stop at any moment, and instead of ignoring it, you learn its mechanism, and you see what you can do." Catherine Aldgate said, "How very pragmatic." "Yes," Ilara agreed, and picked up her spoon again. On the carriage ride home, Adrian sat across from her in the dark and said nothing for 3 miles. Then he said, "You did not have to do that." "She was rude," Ilara said. "People are often rude to me about this," he said. "I have learned to conduct the evening around it." "I know," she said. "I have watched you conduct several evenings around several things. You are very good at it. I find it upsetting." He turned his head toward her in the dark. "Upsetting. You spend a great deal of energy making things smooth," she said. "It costs you. I can see it costing you." He said nothing for a moment. "It is not your job," he said finally, "to see what things cost me." "No," she said, "but I do." The carriage wheels on the road. The dark of the moors on both sides. The distance between them exactly the width of the carriage and also not quite that at all. She looked out the window. He looked out his. In the third week she noticed he was sleeping longer. It was not the thing she had expected to be first. She had been watching for a dozen other indicators, the blood pressure she had learned to estimate without equipment, the color of his face in morning light, the way he held himself when he was tired versus when he was in pain, because those two things were not the same and had different implications. But it was the sleep she noticed first because she had reorganized the corridor so that she would hear him in the morning, and for 3 mornings running he did not move until past 8. She did not say anything about it. She wrote it down. The book exchange continued. A fortnight in, she had written so many margin notes in the Edinburgh text that she ran out of margin and began writing on small cards and inserting them on the relevant pages. He responded to the cards. His responses were thorough and occasionally infuriating, and once, on a card she had left on page 217 about the use of cold compresses for inflammation, said, "Your father taught you well. I wish I had met him." She held that card for a long time before she put it down. She did not respond to it, but she kept it. On a Tuesday morning, he came to find her in the study she had converted into a medical workroom, and he stood in the doorway in that way he had of standing in doorways, neither in nor out, holding his options, and he said, "What did you want to be?" She was writing. She did not immediately look up. "When?" "Before," he said. "Before your father's debts, before all of it. What were you planning to be?" She set her pen down. The window had frost on the lower panes. The light was the particular winter light of the moors, not warm but honest. She looked at it for a moment. "A physician," she said. He said nothing. "It was not possible," she said. "Women are permitted to learn and then not permitted to practice, which is an excellent system for keeping knowledge without utility." She picked her pen back up. "I found other ways to be useful." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You still could be." She kept her eyes on the page. "The laws are not permanent," he said. The Edinburgh Women's College is gaining ground. The arguments being made are the right ones, and they are being made by the right people, and in 5 years, perhaps 10, the doors will be open. You are 27, you have decades. She wrote a word on the page that was not the word she had been intending to write. You still could be, he said again, quieter, as though he knew what it was doing to her and said it anyway. She changed the subject. She did it with the efficiency of a woman who had been changing subjects for survival for 6 years. She said something about the note from the Edinburgh physician, asked a specific question about a reading in his latest blood work, moved the conversation onto solid ground before it could ask anything more of her. He let her. But the sentence stayed in the room. She could feel it staying even after they had moved past it, the way a struck bell stays rung even after you can no longer hear it. The notification of the pregnancy came on a Wednesday morning, delivered by her own hand in her own handwriting, in a note she left on his breakfast plate. It said, "The arrangement has produced what it was designed to produce." She had written it 4 times before she got the words right. The first 3 versions said other things. She burned them in the kitchen fire at 5 in the morning, while Mrs. Aldrich pretended not to notice. He found her in the garden at noon. Not the formal garden. The back garden, the working one, where the previous Duchess had apparently grown medicinal herbs that had been allowed to go wild for the past 4 years, and that Ilara had been quietly rehabilitating for 3 weeks. She had her hands in the dirt. She had mud on her coat. She did not hear him come because the wind was from the north and she had been thinking about the properties of wild valerian. "Ilara," he said. She sat back on her heels and looked up. He was holding the note. He had read it 4 or 5 times by the look of it, the paper having that particular quality of being held repeatedly by someone who was thinking very hard. She waited. He said, "The lawyers will need to be informed." "I know," she said. He said, "Hargrove will want to be involved in the medical arrangement going forward." She said, "Hargrove is not coming anywhere near me, medically speaking. I am perfectly capable of managing this myself in consultation with the Edinburgh physician, who is significantly more current in his understanding, and also believes women are people, which Hargrove has never conclusively demonstrated." A pause. "Very well," he said. She looked at him. He was holding the note with both hands. She noticed that his hands were steadier than they had been 3 weeks ago. She had been watching his hands as one of her indicators, the fine motor stability being a useful measure, and they were better. She had not told him that yet. "Are you all right?" he said. It was not the question she had expected. "I am fine," she said. "That is not what I asked," he said. "I asked if you are all right." She looked at the valerian root she had just freed from the cold soil. It was small but healthy, something that had been dormant for 4 years producing, in the right conditions, the beginnings of a viable plant. "I do not know yet," she said, which was, for her, a significant statement. He stood there holding the note. She sat in the mud. The wind was from the north. He said quietly, "Thank you." She put the valerian root in her tray and moved to the next plant. "Do not thank me," she said. "We had an arrangement. This is the arrangement." He did not say anything else. But he did not leave either. He stood there in the cold while she worked, and she let him stand there, and neither of them mentioned that he had been standing there for 20 minutes when Mrs. Aldrich called them in for lunch. 3 days later she found a letter in her medical workroom. Not from Hargrove, not from Edinburgh. It was in his handwriting, on his personal stationery. It said, "I spoke with the Edinburgh physician this morning. He wants to adjust the approach based on your last batch of notes. He agrees with you about Chapter 3. He also said something I want to tell you before you hear it from him, because it should come from me. He said the pattern of improvement over the last 6 weeks is not what he would expect from the original diagnosis. He said the word cautiously. He is a cautious man. He said, perhaps a year. Perhaps more. He would not say more than that. I sat with this letter for 2 hours before I wrote to you. I want you to know that I understand what this means. The arrangement was built around a certain amount of time. I have more time now than the arrangement assumed. I do not know what that means for you, and I do not wish to assume, and I will not. Whatever you need, whatever you decide, I will arrange for it without objection. I wanted you to hear it from me, because you have been watching my hands." Ilara read the letter. She put it face down on the desk. She sat there for a while, then she picked it up and read it again. She thought about the word cautiously, about a physician who measured his words by weight, using them on something that required careful handling. She thought about 6 weeks of notes, her handwriting in the margins of 7 different texts, the small card on page 217. She thought about the tea at exactly the right temperature outside her door at 6 in the morning, and about what it took to time that right, and what it meant that he had learned to time it. She put the letter in the drawer where she kept the card from page 217. Then she closed the drawer and went back to work, because she had 3 specimens to catalog and a note to write to Edinburgh, and an arrangement that had just become considerably more complicated than it had started. She was not frightened of complicated. Her father had taught her not to be frightened of complicated. He had taught her that complicated was just the word for things that required more than one answer. She had always been good at more than one answer. She just had to decide what the answers were. He withdrew in December. Not obviously. Not in any way she could point to and call a wound. He was present at meals. He responded to her notes. He still left tea outside her door, although she noticed on the 3rd day that he had stopped timing it. The tea was sometimes too hot. Once it was cool. She noticed. He became courteous, not warm, not cold, but courteous in the measured way of someone who was trying very hard not to cost her anything. He asked how she was feeling with the specific, careful concern of a man who had decided that concern was the only thing he was allowed to express. He opened doors. He answered questions. He came to dinner and ate and left, and all of it was done with such deliberate cleanness that she understood immediately what he was doing. He was preparing to be left. He was making it easy for her. He was packing himself down into the smallest space he could occupy so that when she went, the going would not cost her much. She found this unbearable. She did not tell him she found it unbearable. She watched him do it for a week, 2 weeks, watched him become smaller and more careful and more correct, and she wrote her Edinburgh notes, and she catalogued her specimens, and she reorganized the library so that the medical texts were on the reachable shelves, and she did not say anything. On the 14th of December, she found his original prognosis letter. She had not been looking for it. She had been looking for the document from his grandfather's estate, the one he had mentioned once in relation to a property boundary that the Edinburgh physician had referenced in a tax document, and she had been in his study, which he had given her access to without being asked, and she had found the letter in the 2nd drawer. She read it, all of it. Hargrove's handwriting was assured in the way of men who were never uncertain, and therefore frequently wrong. The letter was 8 months old. It described Adrian Hale's condition in the particular language of a man delivering a verdict, not a diagnosis. Terminal, progressive, the available time measured in seasons rather than years. 8 months ago. He had known for 8 months. He had lived with it alone for 2 months before he sent for her. He had done what she had watched him do at every dinner, packed himself down, arranged the surface, conducted the room around what was actually happening. 2 months of knowing this, alone, in a house with cold fireplaces and an unwound clock. She put the letter back exactly as she had found it. She finished her search of the relevant documents. She found the estate boundary paper. She walked back to her workroom and sat down and looked at the valerian specimen on her desk, which was coming along well and would be viable within the month. She opened her journal to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote a single line. 2 months alone with this letter. And then he stood up straight and did not lean on the desk while he said it. She looked at the line for a long time. Then she wrote below it. Chapter 3 was wrong. Chapter 3 has always been wrong. I intend to be considerably more thorough about this than Hargrove. She closed the journal. She got up and went to find him, because 2 months of conducting the room alone was long enough, and she had said she was going to make sure he lived long enough to regret asking her, and she was a woman who kept her word. The letter from Edinburgh arrived on the 19th of December. She intercepted it because she had asked Edinburgh to send everything to her first, and because she had been expecting this particular letter for 10 days, and had been checking the post herself for the whole of that time, which Mrs. Aldrich had noted and not mentioned. She read it in the kitchen, alone, at 6:30 in the morning. The physician's name was Dr. Colin Webb, and he was cautious by nature and expansive by training, and he wrote the way he thought, methodically, building carefully toward each conclusion, never arriving anywhere without showing the full path. She had come to appreciate this about him over the course of their correspondence. The letter was 4 pages. She read all 4. Then she went back to page 2 and read it again. She sat down. Outside the kitchen window, the Moors were doing what the Moors did in December, which was be gray and honest, and entirely unconcerned with what she was feeling. She had come to appreciate that too. The letter said, cautious. The letter said, not what the original indicators suggested. The letter said, the pattern of response over the past 6 weeks represents an unexpected trajectory. The letter said, I would be very reluctant to speculate about duration. The letter said, on page 4, at the bottom, in the slightly smaller handwriting Dr. Webb used when he was saying something he considered to be uncertain but necessary, perhaps a year, perhaps more. I cannot say more with honesty. She sat in the kitchen for 11 minutes. Then she folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket. She made herself a cup of tea, which was too hot because she made it wrong, and drank it anyway. Then she got up, went upstairs, and knocked on the door of his study. He opened it himself. He was dressed. He had been working by the look of the papers on his desk. She held out the letter. He took it, looked at her face, looked at the letter, began to read. She watched him read. She watched his face do the thing it sometimes did when something hit it squarely, the jaw setting, the eyes not quite where they had been, a new stillness that was different from his usual stillness, because his usual stillness was controlled, and this one was not yet. He read to the bottom of page 4. Then he folded the letter in the same places she had folded it, with the same precision, and held it. He said, "This changes things for you." She looked at him. "The arrangement was built on a specific timeline," he said. "You agreed to a finite period. You agreed to what I told you the situation was. This is not what I told you the situation was. You are not obligated by what has changed." She took a long breath in through her nose. "What I mean," he said, carefully, in the voice of a man choosing words like a doctor chose instruments, for precision and minimum damage, is that you are free, whatever you need, whatever you want to do with this. I will make it easy. I want it to be easy for you. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are an idiot." She left the room. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the chair move in his study, heard him start to say something, thought about stopping, did not stop. She went to her workroom. She closed the door. She put her hands flat on the desk and looked at the Valerian specimen, which was doing very well. He did not come after her. Good. He was learning. She did not speak to him for the rest of that day. That was not unusual in itself. They had had days before where the hours passed and the conversation did not. But those silences had been the kind built from two people living in the same space without the right word yet. This silence was built differently. This one had a shape. She was not angry. She was doing something more complex than angry, which was assembling all the things she had been putting in drawers for weeks and looking at them in the full light for the first time, and deciding what she thought about them. She thought about them all afternoon. He came to dinner, she came to dinner. They sat at opposite ends of the large table, as they always had, except that at some point in the past 6 weeks the ends of the table had stopped feeling opposite. She could not say when that had changed. It had changed the way everything changed in this house, quietly and without announcement. He looked at her. She looked at him. She ate her soup. He ate his soup. He said, "I should not have said it the way I said it." "No," she agreed. "I meant it sincerely," he said. "I did not mean it to sound the way it did." "I know what you meant," she said. "You were trying to release me from an obligation you feel you imposed." She set down her spoon. "That is very considerate of you. It is also quite wrong." He said nothing. "You told me I could still become a physician," she said. 3 weeks ago in the study. You said I could still become what I had wanted to be. I changed the subject because it was too large to hold that day." He waited. "I had not told anyone that," she said. "Not since my father. He was the only person who knew it was the thing I had been aiming at, and could not reach. He died knowing I had not gotten there. The candles between them. The long table. You said I could still get there," she said, "and then the first letter comes from Edinburgh, that suggests you might have more time, and your response is to hand me the door and call it a kindness." She picked up her spoon again. "I am telling you that is wrong." He said, "What would be right?" She looked at him down the length of the table and said the most honest sentence she had said to a living person in 3 years. "Ask me to stay," she said. "Not because of the arrangement. Ask me because you want me to." The candles, the silence, the clock in the hall, which had been ticking since the 2nd week of November, and which neither of them had commented on. He said, "Elara." She said, "Yes." He said, "Stay." One word. Not dressed up, not managed, not conducted. Just the word. Sitting in the room the same way the cold sat in the stones of this house, all the way down to the base. She said, "I already was." And that was that. Not a resolution, not a door closed. More like a window opened in a house that had been shut too long. The change happening gradually, and then all at once. The air different before you could name the difference. They finished dinner. She told him about a new text from Edinburgh, a study from 1887 she had been tracking down for 3 weeks. He told her about a property dispute he had been managing with a neighboring estate, one that involved a boundary marker and a rather stubborn beech tree that had been growing on the disputed line for 60 years. She thought the tree had the stronger legal claim. He agreed, for the wrong reasons, which opened a 20-minute disagreement that neither of them won but both of them enjoyed. When they said goodnight in the corridor, it was not the same as previous goodnights, harder to describe. Something in the arrangement of the air between them. In February, the frost began to give way. It did not happen all at once. The moors did not go from winter to spring in a day. They went the way things actually went, reluctantly, by degrees, one morning at a time. A patch of mud here, a suggestion of green there. A morning where the light had a different quality, not warm yet but moving toward the idea of warmth, which after 3 months of Wintersea in December and January, felt like a significant development. She was in the back garden when she noticed it, the medicinal garden, her rehabilitation project, which had gone from wild and overgrown to something she was beginning to think of as genuinely productive. The valerian was coming in strong. The feverfew had surprised her. 2 things she had not expected to survive the frost were surviving the frost because she had mulched correctly, and Mrs. Aldrich, it turned out, had an unexpected knowledge of root vegetables that translated usefully to winter protection of medicinal herbs. Adrian came to the garden on a Saturday morning in the 2nd week of February. She was repotting something. She had dirt on her coat again, which was becoming a permanent state of the coat. He stood at the garden entrance and watched her for a moment, and then came and sat on the low stone wall beside the working bed, which was not something he did. He usually stood. "The report from Edinburgh," he said. She did not look up. "I read it yesterday." "Stable," he said. "Stable," she agreed. "With continued improvement in 3 of the 5 indicators I have been watching." She moved a small plant from one pot to another, with the careful hands she used for careful things. "Hargrove would not recognize the readings as the same patient," he said. "You have been working on this since before we were married." "I have been working on this since the day after we agreed to the arrangement," she said. "I wrote to Edinburgh the following morning." A silence, not uncomfortable. "You did not tell me," he said. "You had not agreed to let me yet," she said. "I was building the case before I presented it. That is how you build cases." He looked at the garden. The frost was in the soil still, but the surface had that particular late winter quality of something deciding to try again. He said, "May I ask you something?" She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Yes." "When you took the arrangement," he said, "what did you think would happen? Not the practical. What did you think?" She looked at the potted plant in her hands. Small, healthy, entirely committed to continuing. "I thought I would do what I had always done," she said. "Be useful, be competent, find the work in the situation and do the work. I thought it would be the same as managing my father's practice after he died, which was managing grief and debt and obligation simultaneously, and not letting any of them win." She turned the pot in her hands. "I thought it would be organized," he said. "It was not organized." "No," she agreed. "You were not organized. You were completely unsortable." She put the pot down. "You read faster than anyone I have ever met. You laugh from somewhere unexpected. You left tea outside my door at exactly the right temperature. You know that the clock in the corridor stopped when your mother died, and you have not wound it, because winding it felt like admitting she had been gone that long." She stopped. He had gone very still. "I was not meant to know that," she said. "Mrs. Aldrich told me by accident. She was very sorry about it." He said, "It is not a secret." "I know," she said. "It is a grief. They are different things." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she had learned to read in him. The kind that was not absence but presence. The kind where he was very much there. He said, "Ilara." She said, "Yes." He said, "Will you stay through the next winter?" She looked at him. He was sitting on the stone wall in the February cold with mud on his coat from where he had sat without checking the wall first, looking at her with the face she had spent months learning, which was the face of a man who had stopped managing what was on it. She said, "I intend to be insufferable about it for several winters." He said, "That will do." The frost in the garden, the mud, the first suggestion of green at the edge of the bed where the feverfew was making its intentions known. She went back to her potting. He stayed on the wall. After a while he started telling her about the beech tree dispute again, which had reached a new development involving the neighboring estate's second son and a surveying error from 1834, and she told him he was wrong about the legal precedent, and he told her she was probably right, and she made him help her move 3 of the heavier pots to the south-facing wall, where they would get the best of the early spring light. He moved the pots. He did not complain about the weight. She looked at his hands afterward. Steady. She had always known he was strong in the ways that mattered. She had been watching for it since the first day. In the set of his jaw. In the way he had stood when standing cost him. In the 2 months of holding a terrible letter alone in a cold house, without letting a single fireplace go unlit where guests might see it. What she had not expected was that he would be strong in the ways that did not matter either, the small ways, the tea timing, the books left without notes, the 14 pages of margin responses in texts she had never expected him to read. The willingness to sit on a cold stone wall in February and ask a woman who had her hands in the mud if she would stay. She made a note of it. She would put it with the card from page 217 and the first burned draft of the pregnancy letter and the things she was no longer putting in drawers. The clock in the front hall ticked. It had been ticking since the second week of November, which she knew exactly because she had wound it herself on the 6th of November at 8:30 in the morning, and she had not told him she had done it, and he had not asked. Some things did not need to be said to be true. The spring came. He was there to see it. Neither of them had entirely expected that. She had worked for it. He had cooperated with the work. But expecting and receiving are different animals, and when the morning came in late March where the light was genuinely warm, not suggesting warmth but actually delivering it, and he was standing in the garden with his face tilted into it like a man receiving something he had stopped allowing himself to want, she did not say anything. She just stood there with him, her hands dirty from the morning's work, the medicinal garden behind them in full early spring readiness, the moors going green in the distance the way the moors went green, stubbornly and thoroughly and without apology. The clock in the hall was ticking. The fireplaces were lit. She had managed, in the course of one winter, to become something that was not in the arrangement and that she did not have a clean word for, and she had decided that was all right. She had always been better at the work than at the naming of the work. She would figure out the name later. There was time.